Hello everyone, how's it going, and welcome back to the channel, or welcome if you're new. And in today's video I'm going to be giving you the full guide to arenas PvP in Star Wars The Old Republic. We're going to be covering a lot of things in this guide so that you can go from being the reason your team loses to being a major contributor into your team's success relatively overnight. First, I'm going to tell you what this video is not. This is not going to be a strategy video going over every single arena that's in the game. This is a deathmatch game mode, so you don't really need to know anything for each map. Technically you can, and we can cover that in later videos, but that is not what this video will be. In this video, we're going to be covering gear and what is the fastest way to obtain the gear, at least in my opinion. We're going to cover basic strategy for general PvP in arenas and some fundamentals and intangibles. So if you genuinely want to get better at PvP, especially in arenas, this is going to be the video for you. This is also going to be a pretty timeless video. Be sure to pay attention to the pinned comment if anything changes via gear rating, but everything in this video is going to be evergreen. Now without further ado, let's jump right in. So the first thing I want to talk about is gear. A lot of what I see in PvP these days, especially in arenas, is a lot of under-geared players. Now this comes from a couple of reasons. One, people think that the only way to get gear for PvP is to play PvP. There is no such thing as PvE/PvE gear anymore, at least in the basic sense. It's not like way back when there was expertise rating on gear for PvP. That is all gone now. The only difference in gear when it comes to PvP and PvE is the stats that you can add. So like maybe you want more accuracy for PvE and you want more crit alacrity for PvP. All of those stats can be tweaked with augments, which we'll get into later. This causes a lot of frustration in PvP for players who are already geared and are just trying to have good matches, because they come across players who think they have to play arenas to get the better gear, and that's not the case. So this is how I would go about getting gear if I was going to jump into arenas, either for the first time or how I would gear to, prepare myself. If you have multiple characters, my recommendation is to go to the supplies section of the Imperial and Republic fleet and get your gear up via Conquest commendations. Why am I suggesting that you do this even though Conquest gear doesn't have the best stats? It's going to get you the highest rating the quickest, in my opinion. You can upgrade your gear for relatively few Conquest tokens and a few credits, and yes, everything is going to be green. You're going to be able to get a higher item rating faster. So after you get a full set of Conquest gear, that's going to start you off at 324. Now you do not want to enter arenas until you are at the very least 332 rating. 334 is actually preferred. The only reason why I'm giving that low of a number is if some of you guys are more experienced, then maybe you can get away with a lower item rating, but you want to set yourself up for success right away, so nothing less than 334. But it isn't hard to get to that item rating. Once you're at 334, the next step that I would take is to go and get augments. Obviously, I'm not going to be giving you what specific augments you would want to get depending on, whatever class you're playing, but you want to go to the GTN and buy yourself some MK11 kits, or if you're a crafter, maybe craft those kits yourself. Kits are going to be what you spend the most money on, but the augments, once you get them, you will have them, but they do cost more upfront. So I would recommend either doing a mix of crafting the MK11s or buying them off the GTN. You can get them for a couple 100K, it's not a lot. The augments, however, the purple ones, are going to be the more expensive things. Some of them run from either 7 to 10 mil a pop, and you're gonna need like 10 of them. So if you aren't crafting augments, you're gonna have to buy them from the GTN. Some people ask, what's the point in auging your green gear if you're going to change it? Well, like I said, the augment kits are very cheap to buy, so you're just going to have to re-augment your gear as you get better rating. It's not that expensive once you have all of the augments, it's just the kits that you'll be replacing. This is going to make sure that you are putting yourself in the best position stat-wise to make your games a lot better, a lot smoother, and not being the reason why your team loses the game. PvP gear, if you're leveling through that way alone, say you're doing regular Warzones and you're completing the weeklies, the highest gear rating that will drop from that is 336. So you can be in full 336 gear and be okay. Those are going to be purple, so they're going to have slightly better stats anyway. You can also aug those. But if you're needing to get into the higher end stuff like 340 and you're trying to get to that 344, you're going to be doing PvE content that's going to get you the most. But once you're at 336 to 340, you are generally okay in PvP. So why am I suggesting you get all this gear before you even jump into a match? Well, one, anyone who sees your gear rating, they're going to put a target on your head and they're going to farm you. It's not just because you may not know how to play arenas, but it's because your item rating is so low. Generally speaking, people with low item rating generally don't know what they're doing in PvP, so the assumption is that's the weak link, go blow them up. And 8 times out of 10, they are correct. So why would you want to put yourself in that situation? I know you want to get experience probably in arenas, but until you have 334 at least, I would not recommend queuing. So now we've talked about gear and augments. It's assumed that you would have your tacticals and your implants and everything. If that is something that got missed, there are other guides for that, but I would just use the conquest implants. You can get your legendary ones too, but depending on how many characters you have, it may not make sense to, so just work with what you have so long as your item rating is sufficient. The next thing we're going to cover in this guide is the fundamentals. Fundamentals of arena are as follows. You stock up on med packs, you stock up on adrenals, and you have a stim. Guys, you will get targeted if you don't have a stim. Stim is PvP 101. If you don't have one, you're going to be targeted. That is just one little thing that you can use to, again, make your experience in PvP so much better. You can go purchase a stim on the GTN for like 150k, or if you have a biochem character, you can make your own stims and you can have them on all of your characters. But you're going to want to have that stim, and it honestly does help. It may not seem like much, but they really do help, especially when it comes down to maybe a 1v1 and you just need to crit that much more, or you just need to have a little bit more absorption rating. Like whatever that stat is, it will come in handy for you. Fundamental number 2, guys, is use ops chat. I've said this before in my other guides on how to get better at PvP, but you always want to know who you're targeting. Even if you're the only person who is using ops chat, don't be that guy that spams ops chat with random commands and things that just don't make the game better. But if you have a strategy suggestion, put it in the chat, because here's what's gonna happen. Most of the time, even if some people don't respond, they will go after the commands if they see them on the screen. So if you say go Sork then Jug, which you wouldn't go in that order generally, it would be like Jug then Sork in my opinion, then at least maybe they don't respond, but they know, okay, they want to target the Juggernaut, then the Sorcerer. So at least you have some type of, continuity when you are going from target to target. Fundamental number 3, if you are a DPS, stop hitting in guard. I see this all the time in regs, and it doesn't matter that much in regular war zones, but in arenas, this is going to be what either wins or loses you games in many cases. I see a lot of people, they get tunnel vision on one particular, player. Maybe you can tunnel them through guard, maybe that's happened in the past, but generally speaking, you do not want to tunnel someone through guard. You want to make the tank do one of two things: focus on dealing damage or focus on guard swapping. If the tank that you're facing isn't particularly fast with his swaps, then you can kill the DPS. Which leads me to fundamental number 4, and that is stop having tunnel vision on healers in arenas. Sometimes it calls for it, but most of the time it doesn't, and I'm gonna explain why. Healers cannot do as much healing output as damage dealing. They can't keep up with the DPS generally speaking. So you don't really need to worry about a healer unless you are playing against one of the top 1% healers in this game, which isn't going to happen very often. A lot of the times the DPS are going to be the targets that you want to focus, because if you have a healer, you know they're not going to be able to keep up with the damage output. You need to slow that damage output. I see a lot of people say, guys, we have to focus healer. That's why we're losing this arena. That is rarely why you're losing an arena match. You're losing because you're not doing enough damage to the right targets. And if you do damage to the wrong target, well, I'm sorry, your damage becomes irrelevant and you lose anyway. The only time a healer makes sense as, again, maybe the tank is slow at guard swapping and the healer is not geared very well, then maybe you go and you swap a healer for a DPS or something like that. But generally speaking, guys, I know it's kind of in our nature to say, ooh, healer, you know, regular Warzone, mark him, kill him, like let's just make sure the healer can never, you know, get anything off. That's not always going to be the case in arenas. It's a completely different ballgame. You're working with much faster match times and abilities for your match to flip on its head in one given GCD. I'll give you an example. If you know that you're facing one of the best DPS juggernauts in all of Star Wars: The Old Republic, then you are going to want to make sure you can take them out of the fight as quick as possible. Why would you say that? Because if you know that everyone else is relatively going to be alright, let's say their next DPS is like an operative playing concealment or something, you think you have better odds of surviving the operative than the juggernaut. And let's say they have a healer, let's say it's a mercenary healer and an assassin tank, right? That juggernaut is going to be the biggest threat to you guys, you know, losing the match. Like you don't want to lose because of him. So that is why you would target the juggernaut over a healer, because a healer can heal. They're not gonna do anything that we don't already know is happening, okay? But a good DPS ruins teams with healers, with tanks, with no healers and no tanks. Good DPS is king right now. Fundamental number 5, and this is something that I see the most in PvP and arenas anyway, is terrible cooldown management. I have terrible cooldown management in some case, but I am playing PT tank most of the time, so I can get away with not really using my cooldowns very well, at least most of the time. It does come back to bite me every so often, but I see this all the time because I'm usually running in and charging people right away or pulling them with my grapple. I have pulled mercenaries, I have pulled sorcerers, and I see them use their force barrier when they get pulled or when they get stunned. If you're new to my channel, then you won't know this, but I'll say it for anyone here who's, you know, heard me before. Your first stun and your first CC that you end up taking is unlikely to ever kill you, unless you are fighting a full team of 4, like one guild versus another that's super coordinated. The first pull ain't gonna kill you. So don't use your barrier or your responsive safeguards if you are a merc commando, because let me tell you, that tells experienced players that you don't know what you're doing. It tells experienced players that you panicked, and once they know that you're that easy to rattle, they will do it again, and they'll just take you out of the fight. And it's gonna make your time in the war zone, you know, not as fun. Why queue up more if you're gonna keep getting, you know, smashed over and over and over again? But it can be changed if you change a little bit of your playstyle. Part of that is being able to trust your teammates and being able to trust yourself in those high pressure situations. If you're playing with a tank and they have a guard on you, don't run out of guard range. The tank should be moving with you if they are, you know, good at their role. Do not run out of guard range. I was playing with a sorcerer actually a few days ago who we probably could have won the game, but they were jumping on him immediately. He would phase walk and then barrier immediately, and he would go out of guard range, so they would just run past me, wait for him, stun him after a bubble, and kill him in about 3 seconds. You have to be able to know when to use certain cooldowns, and I will link that in another video. This is not going to be the one, or this video is going to be, you know, a million years long. But learning your cooldown management and learning when to use them and when it's the best time is also going to save your life 9 times out of 10. The last thing that I want to cover is probably the most important, and that's the mindset of arenas versus regular war zones. There are a lot of unconventional things about arenas that do not happen in war zones. For example, as a tank, sometimes doing protection is not going to win you the game, especially when, let's say, they are tank tunneling you and they're focusing you. Sometimes you're going to just need to kite around the map and just live as long as possible, because it's not just about doing more damage, it's when you do the damage and how you do it, and depending on how long it takes, that will determine whether or not you win or lose a match. There are plenty of games that I've played on my Power Tech and my Vanguard where I have dropped my guard, popped hydraulics, and ran around the McKeb Mesa and I had an operative or a marauder chase me. Why would I do that if I'm the tank, even if I don't have a healer? Because if everyone is running after me, they're not popping cooldowns for themselves. They are not focusing on the other members of my team, and because of that, most of the time, they die because of it. You cannot approach arenas in a black and white mindset. There is going to be variables that you have to account for. And if you don't account for those variables, you will lose most of your matches. And building off of that a little bit more, I want all of you to understand something. You are as responsible for your losses as your wins most of the time. Because generally speaking, if you don't pop a cooldown right, if you don't use the right ability combo or interrupt certain things, or like hit into guard, for example, or hit into some saber reflect or responsive safeguards, you know, that's not on your teammates. That's on you not paying attention to abilities on the screen, buffs and debuffs. So before you go and flame someone for not doing their job, I think it's important to look at what you've done, because you contributed as much to the loss as the win. Now, there are going to be games where sometimes there's nothing you can do, right? You're just gonna have teammates that aren't good, that aren't gonna be able to do the things that you're going to do. And in that sense, that isn't your fault. Sometimes you just can't carry that many people. But generally speaking, everyone has a role to play in a loss, just like everyone has a role to play in a win. And if you approach arenas like that, you're not gonna be as mad. You're not gonna get as frustrated, and you're going to have a much more enjoyable time. I still get mad every now and again when I think I've done everything right, and I look back at the video that I recorded and I'm like, actually, I didn't do this right. I blew all my cooldowns thinking I would have time for them to come back up, and they didn't, and I died because of it, and we lost the match. Like, you have to be able to think like that and move on from it, okay? I don't want you to get caught up in anything else, because it just makes the game not fun. But if you know what you're going into and you go in with that mindset, you're gonna be okay, you're gonna be fine. If you are struggling with a class, getting better, surviving, I would highly recommend you go and watch Ivano1337, watch his guides. Mark Biggs also has some good guides out there. I don't make those on the channel, but I highly recommend you guys go watch them, because it's one thing to know how to play your class, it's another to learn how to play against other classes and how that will tie in to your game. I hope you guys found this video helpful. If you did, be sure to subscribe. My name is Noble. I will see you legends in the next one. Peace.